much for joining us today. My name is Ian Scott, and I am the founder of Scott Legal. We are going to spend some time today talking about the E-2 visa requirements, and in particular, E-2 visas when the case is a risky case, and we're going to get into the details with respect to what constitutes a risky case. A few things before we get started. Some of you may know that the firm was founded on an E-2 visa 8 years ago, and I'm here in the US personally on an E-2 visa. So know what many of you are now going through. And to the extent that we've renewed the visa once already, we were issued the visa for 5 years and then renewed it for another 5 years. So happy to share my personal experience with any of you. The firm is a full service immigration firm, but we focus primarily on E-2 visas. We've processed hundreds of them, and we typically process our E-2 visas exactly the topic today. Most of our E-2 visas are E-2 visas that are considered higher risk, and in many cases lower investment amounts or investment amounts of under 100,000. We've processed E-2 visas at consulates around the world and do a number of E-2 visas in Toronto and in London. But as I said, we've processed around the world. We will continue this webinar series, and we'll do at least 2 webinars a month, and we often will do more than that. The next webinar that we have after this one is on a familiar and fun topic, H-1Bs. The H-1B season is fast approaching, so that is scheduled for next week, I believe, but you can check the exact date. We'll send you the information with respect to the exact date. At the end of this meeting, we will send you a few things. One thing that we'll send you is a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We will also send you an E-2 visa guide. It's a comprehensive guide that has a description of all of the E-2 visa requirements. And we'll also send you a link where you can sign up for additional webinars. So that will have, as I said, the details with respect to the upcoming webinars. In terms of our panelists today, we're lucky to have Kelly LeGrand-Wiener, who's the managing attorney at the firm, and Michaela Brazdova, who's an associate at the firm. Both of them have vast experience in this area and have processed, probably collectively hundreds of E-2 visas. And again, my name is Ian Scott, the founder of the firm, and I will be the moderator. To the extent that you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A box. We'll definitely get to all of them. There are some people who sent in questions ahead of time, so we will we'll answer those. There are a lot of people who signed up, over 70 people who signed up for this seminar today, but regardless, we'll get through all of the questions during the seminar. And finally, the webinar will be recorded as well. So it will be available on demand after the presentation today. So without further delay, we'll turn it over to Michaela and Kelly to start the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Great. So I think we're going to start just talking a little bit about the E-2 visa requirements, the basic things that you need to, to do to get an E-2 visa. So the first is you have to be a national of a treaty country. The E-2 visa is only available to nationals of those specific countries that have treaties with the United States. The second is that you must make an investment, and that investment, the funds need to be committed and at risk. So that means that you can't just take, a big chunk of money and put it into a personal or, business bank account and have it sitting there. You actually need to spend the money, have the money invested, or to purchase a business. Part of this investment requirement is you need to show that the source of the money comes from a legitimate source. So this can be things like personal savings from employment, a gift from a friend or a family member, sale of property, or even a loan, loan secured by your personal assets. It cannot be a loan that is secured by any of the assets of the E-2 business. So that's one of the caveats for a loan. The other, part of the investment requirement is that the investment needs to be what's substantial. And what is considered substantial is going to depend on the type of business that you're starting. So for example, if you're starting a service-based business, we're here today to talk about kind of these lower investment amounts. So often that, is most applicable to service-based businesses, e-commerce businesses, businesses like law firms where you arguably can spend, less than $100,000 and really have spent everything needed to set up the company. Part of the E-2 investment, as we discussed, needs to be money that's spent. So that can be things that are spent on, inventory, equipment, setting up a website, getting office supplies, marketing expenses, business setup, paying employees. Um, and additionally, if you're making an investment, you also want to look at, if it's substantial. If you're starting a business, you're looking at what are reasonable startup costs for this type of business. If you're purchasing a business, then, usually you can basically say the investment amount is substantial if it's the fair market value. So if it's somebody that you don't know that's selling you a business, and this is what they valued their business at, and it makes sense based on the financials, then a substantial amount is going to be, what they're charging for the business and what you were willing to pay. Another requirement for the E-2 is the business cannot be marginal, which means it must support more than just the investor and their family, and it needs to make a substantial economic impact in the United States. And the easiest way to meet the marginality requirement is to show that you've hired employees in the US for your business. We usually recommend, that you're able to show that you've hired at least, 3 to 5 employees by year 5 of your operations. It's not a requirement necessarily to have employees when you file your petition, but there should be a plan to hire employees over time. Another requirement for the E-2 is your business must be real and operating. So if the business is already running, you're purchasing a business that's already in operation. This is easier to show. You can do things like tax returns, W-2s, invoices, any business bank statement showing commercial activity. For startups, you may show things like you've created a website, you've gotten all appropriate licenses, you filed all of the entity setup paperwork, and that you're really ready to start the operation once you get the E-2 visa. Another requirement for the E-2 is that you must be coming to the US to develop and direct the enterprise. So it's not possible to get an E-2 and just be a passive owner. This visa is meant for people that actually want to come to the US and take an active role in running the business. And E-2 investors must also own 50% of the E-2 company, at least 50%. So you can also own more. Many of our investors do, own the company outright, but it has to be at least 50%. And the last requirement is that you have to have the intent to return to your home country upon the expiration of the E-2 visa. Usually this is satisfied just by providing a letter that states that intent. The E-2 visa can be renewed indefinitely. So it's not a requirement that that you maintain a residence in your home country. You can move all of your things to the United States, but it is still a non-immigrant visa, and that you cannot, indicate that you want to get a green card and remain here permanently when you submit the application. So those are our initial E-2 requirements.
Perfect. So Kelly, a number of questions that came in and were submitted earlier. So the first one, it's a question that just came in, but it's similar to one that someone had sent in as well, and it has to do with W-2 versus 1099 employees. So could you talk a little bit about those two, and then maybe specifically in relation to renewals as well?
Sure, sure. So, I'd say W-2 employees are always going to be stronger for an E-2 application than 1099s. If we look at a sliding scale of what's going to be strongest for your application, it's always going to be stronger if you are saying, I have full-time W-2 employees. 1099s are also, good to show, but are just not given as much weight. If you're in the type of business that often issues 1099s, for example, construction businesses, and you have really high dollar value 1099s, like if you're issuing 1099s for 6 figures, or high 5 figures to to various independent contractors, that can be positive for the application. But overall, W-2 employees are just stronger, particularly for renewals. Yes, it is possible to submit a renewal with just 1099s, but I'd say we always recommend that you try to have W-2 employees instead. And if you're going to go ahead with 1099s, it's just a bit riskier. And you would want to make sure that you had a really strong argument for substantial economic impact, that the company was still paying a lot of money to these independent contractors and to other US vendors.
Perfect. And Kelly, just to, one person had written asking what the W-2 and 1099 is, but I'll just quickly explain it. W-2 is an actual traditional employee. So if you're Canadian, it would be a T4 employee, but someone who is working for the company and receiving a salary, whereas a 1099 would be more of an independent contractor. So sometimes if you hire a photographer for a wedding or something, or it's the example Kelly used, if there's a construction company and the construction company is hiring people to do plumbing or hiring electricians and things like that, those would normally be paid with 1099. Perfect. So a few other questions that came in with respect to the requirements, Kelly. One has to do with legal fees. Can legal fees, like incorporating the business or even applying for the E-2 visa, be considered an expense or investment for the E-2?
Yes, they can. They can
Perfect.
be included.
Perfect. And then another question had to do with the startup versus like the purchasing versus starting an existing business. And the question was, which one is better? Which one's better to do?
So I think that, if you are purchasing an existing business that's already demonstrated success through tax returns, already has employees, that's a stronger starting point for the officer. There's less, I think, concern about whether or not it's really going to be a viable enterprise, as opposed to a startup company where really the officer is only able to see a business plan, isn't able to see, actual performance. So I think generally buying an established business can be a kind of a safer route. And with purchasing a business, you also have the option to put your money into escrow. And then if the E-2 visa is denied, you actually could get your money back. So there's that safety check built in with purchasing a business. That being said, I'd say the vast majority of E-2s that we do are startups, and many of them, are very successful. So it is very possible to do a startup, even though purchasing a business may ultimately be a stronger place to start.
Perfect. And another question that came up, Kelly, that I missed a bit earlier, it has to do with employees. And the question is, it's in the chat, what are the minimum number of employees do we need to employ for an E-2 visa?
So there's no kind of stated minimum in the regulations. We like to say at least 3 full-time employees by 5 years. I think that's a good kind of minimum. Again, it kind of depends on your business. One thing they're not going to like is if, for example, you're doing a consulting company. We're going to speak more about those later. They really don't want, the E-2 is not for people who want to kind of come in and be a solo consultant. So they are really going to want to see, that you do have some employees in the U.S. So I'd say, 3 is a good number, but certainly we, have renewed with less. I think, I think we have renewed with maybe 2 full-time employees or full-time and a part-time, but that's in a case where there's other really strong factors about the business, and usually where there's a proof that the people intend to hire in the near future.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. So let's move to, kind of building off of the E-2 requirements and describing them a little bit more. Who can apply? So as we discussed, you have to be a national of a treaty country. Many European countries, for example, the UK, France, Spain, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands. Additionally, other countries, and Ian mentioned Canada, Colombia, Chile, and then New Zealand and Israel were actually recently added to the list. And there's a long list. This isn't all encompassing, but it just goes to show there is a lot. There are a lot of treaty countries that you can potentially be eligible for an E-2.
And Kelly, do you have to live in the country in order to get the visa? And is it based on your country of birth, or?
So it's based on the country. It's not based on your country of birth. It's based on the country where you are currently a citizen, where you currently have a passport. And for most of the E-2, countries, no, you don't need to live there. As long as you have the passport, that's sufficient. There's one caveat, which is for the UK, where they actually do have a residency requirement. So if you're a UK national, you have a UK passport, but you've never lived in the UK and you have no residency or ties to the UK, you wouldn't be able to qualify for an E-2 based on that. However, if you are a UK national, maybe you've been in the US for a couple of years working on another visa, but the UK is still where you've lived and where you return to, then you certainly could still apply for an E-2 based on your UK nationality.
Perfect. No, that sounds great. And it's funny. A question just came in. It was sent to all of us only, but I think that you're going to talk about the reciprocity and the time that visas are issued for. And when you do, maybe if you could just talk about the options that some might have if they have a very low visa validity period.
Sure, perfect. So, so one big question that comes up is how long is your E-2 visa valid? There's many countries like Canada where you can get an E-2 visa for 5 years. Then there's other countries, Jordan, Bangladesh, where you can only get the actual visa stamp for 3 months. And what that means is that you get your visa stamp for 3 months. When you enter the country, you can be given 2 years in E-2 status. So you have that 2 years to stay in the US and run the company. However, you don't have that ability to travel. So it does mean that if your business is the type, or for personal reasons, you need to travel in and out of the country a lot, you would need to, basically go back to a consulate each time and get a new visa stamp. So ultimately, that's a choice the investor can make. Many of our investors, get the initial visa stamp, come in, they spend time in the US, they commit to kind of stay here and not travel and run the company for a period of time. So then when they do go back to a consulate, when they travel again, they can show, here's tax returns, here's W-2s, here's proof, that the company is doing well. If you're in a position where you do need to travel a lot, it is still possible to go and get that visa stamp renewed at consulates. Right now, it's much more complicated, unfortunately, because of COVID, because of the global pandemic. It's really not, as simple to get appointments at consulates. So things that may have worked in the past, which is either entering on the visa, staying for the 2 years, that still works. But entering on the visa and then leaving and going to the consulate, many times to get the renewal, that unfortunately is more difficult right now because of limited ability to get visa appointments. And just looking at the specific questions, in terms of our fees and the documents that you need to provide. So when you go back to the consulate, they will want to see any updates on the business. So depending on how long it's been, since you submitted to them the last time, you would need to provide, all the documents that show that the company is still running and that you are still eligible for the visa. Another, can you renew status in the US? So yes, it's possible to extend your status from within the US. So if you get a visa stamp, you enter, you have the 2 years, and you want to extend at the end of that 2 years instead of getting a visa stamp, you can certainly do that. You will need to submit all of the documents proving that you have met the E-2 requirements. So extending from within the US, the government doesn't consider necessarily the approval of the consulate. They'll make their own assessments, and they'll want to see all the investment documents and all the source of funds documents, as well as proof of how the company has developed over the past 2 years. And the last, can I leave the US while in status? By applying for permission to leave and return. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I understand exactly what this question is. Yes, you can leave. If you're going to, there is something called automatic visa revalidation, where if you're going for an under 30-day trip to Canada or Mexico, and you have a valid I-94, you can re-enter. That's kind of an exceptional circumstance, though. In most cases, if you're leaving, you will, as I said, you will need to go get the visa stamp, before you can return to the United States.
Yeah, there's no ability to, there's no ability to be in the United States and say, with a 3-month visa that's only one entry, and then say apply and ask them, let's say you had to go do something else, and there's no ability to apply and say, I just have to leave for a week, can you give me permission to do so? That doesn't exist. The permission is getting a new visa. Under that limited, the few, the categories of people who are where the reciprocity, it's called, the length of time that the visa is issued for is very, very short.
Exactly.
Kelly, there's another question that came in that the business supports employees but not the owner. So the question is, what if the business supports employees but not the owner, who survives through personal savings? It's an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say that when you do the renewal, they're really not very concerned about how you as the investor are supporting yourself. They are much more concerned with, is the business able to support employees? So I would say, if the business is able to support employees and you're able to show that, I think that's a good case for renewal, even if you as the owner are not taking any distributions or paying yourself.
Yeah, and I think especially if you have an explanation, right? Because they're not a consulate's not going to think that you have the company set up for altruistic reasons. So if you're not making money, right, they'll wonder what the point is, right? So, but I think that if let's say that you were issued the visa for 2 years or something, or some countries a year or 2 years, and you were running the business, and then it just wasn't making a lot of money, but it was making enough to hire enough to pay the employees, I think it might be fine. As Kelly said, I think it might be fine to explain that your business is and it's making enough money to pay employees, but not me. But other than, as I said, the legal part is it's fine to do, but they may just question what why someone is running a business when they're not making any money, right, themselves. So,
Right, particularly if you're going for a renewal, I think after 5 years,
yeah,
they may be
exactly. Yeah,
concerned
yeah.
about that. But overall, yeah, the focus will really be on what are the financials of the company, and are they, are they employed, and do you have a reason? For example, if you're reinvesting for some reason or something like that.
Perfect. Great.
Perfect. All right. Um, so I think, the next thing that we were going to talk about is how much investment is enough. There is no set minimum amount that you need to invest. There's nothing that, in the regulations or the law that says you have to invest X amount in order to get an E-2 visa. However, as we mentioned, the investment must be substantial in light of the business that you're setting up. And it depends on the type of business. So for a service-based business, consulting business, or a law firm, you can argue a lower startup amount. I'd still say that you're looking in the neighborhood of, $50 to $100,000 in terms of total investment, including expenditures plus some working capital for the business. You want to be able to say, I've spent everything necessary to start up the business. But you really want to be looking in the neighborhood of spending somewhere around at least $30,000 to $40,000. This is based on our current experience. In the past, we certainly have gotten E-2s approved where people have spent less than that, but we've noticed over time that consulates are, wanting people to invest more. So we recommend, in terms of making the application stronger, that if you're able to make, higher expenditures closer to that $30,000 to $40,000 amount, that you do that to try to, bolster the chance of an approval.
Perfect. Kelly, one question that came in that it related more to the time, though, the time visas are issued for, and whether or not consulates, let's say someone from Canada or the UK, that where the maximum amount of time the visa can be issued for is 5 years. Do they ever issue the visa for less time than the 5 years?
Sometimes they do. If I'd say that the vast majority of our cases, they issue it for 5 years. They register the business for 5 years, but it is always possible that if they felt the business was very speculative, or they had questions about whether it was going to be successful, they could issue the visa for less time than that. They do have that, that power, and, in their discretion, they can make that choice, to issue it for maybe a 2-year period and say, okay, we'd like you to come back in 2 years and we'll check and see, how the business is doing at that time. So it is always possible, but the vast majority are issued for 5 years.
Perfect. Great.
Perfect. So going back to the, kind of looking at the proportionality test, and how much, investment is enough. You want to be able to say, when you're talking about all these lower risky amounts, you really want to be able to say you spent 100% of what's necessary to start up the business. So that's an argument that you can make, by pointing, to each of the investments that you've made and saying, I'm running a law firm, I have, obtained all my necessary licenses. I've got an office space set up, I have, a computer, I have, all the appropriate insurance permissions and software. And, all that's needed is for me to get the visa, to come and start the business. You can also do things to bolster this, with lower investment amounts, by providing things like market research. There are trade publications and magazines sometimes that will provide, estimates of startup costs. Those types of respected publications can sometimes be helpful to make your argument with the consulate to say, yes, this may seem like a lower amount, but it really is something that's, everything that's necessary to start up the business. And look, there's even objective confirmation, out there from other industry sources. Additionally, you can also have, sometimes what we do is have our clients can go to a CPA, who may look at their business plan and look at their expenditures and may weigh in on, whether or not they have an opinion as to whether this is a sufficient amount of investment for the type of business that you're starting. And then when you're buying a business, really the fair market value of the business is what's going to be considered. If you're buying a business and the seller, or there's some type of relationship there, then that's something where you may want to get an objective valuation. But most of the time, if it's really just a pure third-party transaction, whatever they're charging for the business, on the market is going to, if you're paying that amount, that's going to be considered substantial.
Perfect. And Kelly, a few questions that came in on investment amount. So the first one had to do with service-oriented businesses or businesses that don't take a lot of money to get started. And so they'd meet maybe the proportionality test where you could spend like 5,000 or 6,000, maybe 100% of that, and whether that would be fine for an E-2.
So unfortunately, no. We get this question a lot, I think, and especially, there's many people who do feel, and it may really be the case that they have their computer and that's really all they need. They don't need office space. But unfortunately, I'd say an amount that low is really not ever going to qualify for an E-2 visa. Really, as I mentioned, you're looking more towards spending around 30 to 40,000. It may be that you can get away with spending less than that, but I think that you would really need a lot of other strong elements of the case. For example, employees, proof of, kind of large contracts, things like that to bolster why it was that you could spend such a low amount. But something as low as 5,000, I think really isn't viable. Usually what we recommend to our clients is you want to make expenditures for things that make sense for your business, but that maybe you wouldn't purchase till later. So maybe you purchase some extra equipment, maybe you hire an employee a little earlier than you otherwise would have planned to. Maybe you invest some more money in your website up front than you would have planned to. So even though it's increasing your expenditures, that's good, which may not be what you want to do as an entrepreneur, as a new business owner. That's really what's needed for the visa.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good. And the other question that really follows that one, I think, is just what's the lowest amount how low can you go, right? What's the lowest amount you can invest and perhaps have a successful case?
So, I mean, in the past, I think we've done around, expenditures of maybe 15,000 with 35,000 in a business bank account. So it certainly is possible to do that. But I think it's at some consulates, it really would not be possible. So Canada is a consulate that we found that's very receptive to lower investment amounts. Similarly, if you're filing an extension or an initial case from within the United States with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, they can be more open to that. But I'd say that if you're, while we've done that in the past, over the years, maybe, 15,000, I'd say maybe more like 20, 25,000 is really the lowest you would want to go in terms of expenditures. And again, that's with having all these other strong aspects of the application, having the clients, having, a letter explaining why this is this is a substantial amount, and having it make sense in light of your business. I think that would really be the lowest, with 25,000 spent and 25,000 or 30,000 in a business bank account.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good. And then the final question that came in with respect to the investment amount has to do with leased premises and whether that's necessary. And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that we always recommend to our clients to get leased premises because we think it helps prove real and operating, and it's also a good expense. That being said, there was a change recently to the Foreign Affairs Manual where they explicitly said no physical space is required. So for these smaller businesses, consulting, law firms, particularly in light of COVID and where we are, I think it is very possible that you could file an E-2 without getting office space. I think it's stronger if you get office space, but it's possible without it. One caveat is if you have the type of business that requires physical space to operate. So for example, if you're starting up a restaurant, then obviously you need, a commercial space for that.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good. No, great. And just I want to let everyone know there are a lot of questions coming in. Some of them I'm saving because we do have quite a bit of time at the end to go over question and answers. But there are about 6 or 7 questions. I have seen them, but we are just going to come to them. We will get to all of them as well.
Perfect. And I think Michaela's going to discuss strategies to deal with the low dollar amount.
Yeah, so I will briefly go over this, how to deal with a case when the investment amount is low and how you can improve, your chances for approval. So I would say when the investment is very low, so as Kelly said, it can be around $20, $25, $30,000. You would want to make the other aspects of your E-2 petition very strong. And the two requirements or two areas where you could kind of strengthen the application would be the requirement that the business is real and operating. And in this requirement, if the business is kind of already kind of up and running, you already have clients, you could submit things like contracts with the clients, company's bank statements showing that you are accepting money from clients, and things like that. And in case when the business is not taking revenue yet, but is ready to kind of start operating as soon as you get the E-2 visas, you could submit things like letters of intent from potential clients. And one thing we have been also submitting is a letter from your local Chamber of Commerce. So usually your local Chamber of Commerce would be willing to kind of issue you this letter for a small fee when you join the Chamber of Commerce. They would kind of look at your business, look at the application, and they would issue you a letter in which they would say, if they think that your business would support kind of like the local economy, and they would kind of issue their opinion that, if it would be good if your business would kind of come in that area. If you plan to hire a lot of employees, they could also kind of mention that in the letter. If your business is kind of not taking revenue yet, that could be definitely helpful to submit with your petition. And a second area which you could kind of like strengthen your E-2 petition, especially when the investment amount is very low, is the marginality requirement. So if possible, we would definitely recommend that you hire employees before you apply for the E-2 visa. And in that case, even if the investment amount is low, you could submit evidence like payroll or pay stubs and kind of argue, and make argument that the business is kind of already successful. It already has employees. And even though the investment amount is low, you are already kind of supporting the local economy by employing people. And in case you don't want to hire employees, we would definitely recommend that you submit a strong business plan in which you would basically explain your hiring projections, meaning that you would explain how many employees you plan to hire in the next 5 years, on what positions, what salaries you are planning to pay them. And you would also explain how much revenue you plan to make in the US, and explain the revenue assumptions. That would basically be how you plan to achieve the revenue. And I listed here 2 examples of 2 situations that are very different. So the first example, you are starting a business in the US and the investment amount is very low. So let's say the investment amount is, $25,000, and you already have 2 employees. The business is already taking revenue, and the revenue is around $80,000 per month. And you already have signed contracts with 10 clients for kind of like a large dollar value amount. So in this case, I would say that, even though the investment amount is very low, this case would be very approvable because you have made all those other efforts like hiring employees, finding clients, you're already taking revenue. So I would say the example one, even though the investment is low, your case would probably be approved. But again, that would also depend on a consulate where you are applying, because some consulates would just not like that you only spend $25,000. And the second example is a situation when you are applying for an E-2 visa. The investment amount is very low, but you don't want to invest any more money, and you don't want to hire any employees until the E-2 visa is issued. And you don't have, you haven't signed any contracts with clients, but you could submit 2 letters of intent for a project, and let's say the value of each project would be $10,000. So I would say in the second example, the case, what we would recommend is to definitely strengthen the E-2 application by again hiring you as employees, kind of starting the operations of the business before you apply for the E-2 visa, because the facts of this second situation are a little bit too weak. And just because the investment amount is low, you don't have any employees, you don't have any clients, you have 2 potential clients, you are not taking revenue yet. I would say in this second example, the case would most likely not get approved. So again, if the investment amount is low, there are definitely strategies. It's definitely possible to strengthen the E-2 application and still get the case approved, but it would you would have to make some additional efforts, like hiring you as employees and things like that, to make the application stronger. So now I will talk a little bit about some common E-2 visa expenditures and what are some strong and weak E-2 expenditures. So we often get a question, especially in when we get a new client. The client is not sure what he or she should spend money on, and what are good, what are bad E-2 expenditures, and what E-2 expenditures can be kind of like part of the E-2 investment. So as Kelly mentioned already, the expenditures you should make will depend on what type of business you are starting. But I listed here some common E-2 expenditures that could be applicable to different types of businesses. So any money you spend to set up your website on the website domain could be part of the E-2 investment. Any computer equipment like printers, scanners, tablets, phones could be included as E-2 investment. If your business will be selling products, then the inventory you buy could be part of the E-2 investment. Any furniture you buy for your office could be included. If you have any trademark or intellectual property rights, that could be included. Any money you pay to your employees could be included. So I think this is definitely helpful in the cases when the investment amount is low and you hire employees. You could include the money you are paying the employees to your investment amount. So in that case, the investment amount would also go higher. So it's that's why it's definitely helpful to hire employees if your investment amount is low. Then any legal fees, so any fees you pay business attorney to kind of help you with setting up the business entity, any fees you pay to immigration attorney could be included. Any money you pay for a lease could be included. So for example, if you let's say you find a commercial office space and you prepay the lease for the next 12 months, you could include all that money, all 12 months to the investment amount. Any business entity setup costs, so any money you kind of pay to the state to set up the business entity could be included. Office supplies, utility bills could be included. Training courses to some extent could be included. any kind of licensing fees could be included. Car or truck. So this expense, many people actually ask us, if I buy a car, could that be considered part of the E2 investment? Generally, it could only be included if you need the car or the truck to kind of successfully run your business. So let's say you have a transportation company and you bought 5 cars, so your employees, the drivers, can kind of do the operations. In that case, the cars could definitely be included. But let's say you have a consulting business and you buy a car because you don't want to take public transport. In that case, the car could not be included. And then any software fee, any fees you pay for software or advertising or marketing, those expenditures could also be included. And now let's talk briefly about some weak E2 expenditures. So these are expenditures that we usually do not recommend including as a part of the E2 investment because they are just not strong and they are basically not helpful for your E2 application. So any money you spend when you are kind of flying to the US or on flight tickets, that money we usually do not include it in the investment schedule unless let's say you are starting a business and there is very specific business conference somewhere in the US and you need to fly there to kind of build your skill set. That potentially may be included, but generally we do not include money that you spend on flight tickets to the investment amount. Now, any money you pay for accommodation like hotel, Airbnb, we don't recommend including that money to the investment schedule because again, when consular officer will kind of be looking at your application and will be looking what money how much money you spend in the US and what did you spend the money for, including kind of like hotel bills is not usually helpful. Then any money you spend for meals or transportation like taxis, Uber, we definitely don't include that. Then entertainment, so let's say you invite your big client to like a Super Bowl final or something like that, we would definitely not include that in the investment schedule because again it's just not helpful to kind of to include it. And any expenses you pay to related parties, so your family members, for example, that we generally don't include those.
Michaela, a question that came in, or two questions that came in. One that has to do with when the expenditures have to be made. So the question is I want what happens if I am ready to invest $100,000 and have invested in the past? Can I make a projection that I will spend the rest during the next year? So I think it's two separate questions. So let me just ask it two different ways. So what happens to investment that you made before the business has been started, the E2 business has been started?
Yeah, so we can definitely include those expenditures, and we sometimes do it, when people, let's say, buy a new computer or a new laptop, for example, 3 years before they kind of start the E2 business, and they will be using the laptop to kind of operate the business. We can definitely, if the person still has kind of invoice or receipt for that, we can include it. So it's definitely possible, but I would say sometimes it's just more difficult to kind of like track. People don't often keep the invoices, the receipts, especially if they bought something really expensive. So let's say for $15,000, they don't have the invoice yet, and they want to include it as part of the investment. That may be a little bit more problematic, but it's definitely possible to include things that you kind of purchased before you started the E2 business, before you set up the entity. So it is possible.
Perfect. And then the second part of this question, I think, has to do with if you have money and can you include in your investment amount projections to spend more money in the future?
So unfortunately, no. At the time you are applying for an E2 visa, we usually submit like investment schedule that lists, kind of the expenses you already made at the time the application is submitted, and only those expenses can be kind of counted as a part of the E2 investment. So and any kind of money you have on your business bank account as a working capital, we could include that. But the consulate would not really consider, projections to spend money in the future. So yeah, definitely. Generally, only the money you have spent before you submit the application can be counted as an investment.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
So now let's discuss some challenges and some issues that come up when someone is starting a consulting business. So as Kelly mentioned before, especially for kind of service-oriented business, so for example, consulting business, you could theoretically invest very low money and kind of start the company. So for example, you could buy a laptop for $2,000, set up a website for, let's say, $500. So that would be $2,500. And, you could potentially argue that everything that needed to be spent for the business was spent. But as Kelly mentioned, for the E2 visa, this would not be sufficient, because for the E2 visa, you will have to show that you are committed to successfully run the E2 business. And if you only spend, a couple $1,000s, the officer would just probably not think that you are that committed to run the business, because you really haven't spent that much money, and you don't really have that much to lose, if the business is not successful. So for the E2 visa, we definitely recommend spending substantial amount of money before you apply for the E2 visa, and kind of making all the expenditures you wouldn't normally have to make in the beginning. For an E2 visa, we definitely recommend making them before you apply for an E2 visa. So again, even if you kind of don't need an office space immediately, we would recommend getting an office space and kind of prepaying the lease for a couple of months. Buying any kind of equipment, so like computers, scanners, furniture, kind of investing in all those things before you apply for the E2 visa, to show to the officer that you are committed to the business, and you invested substantial amount of money to the business, and you kind of really have something to lose, if the business is not successful.
Great.
So now Kelly will talk a little bit about some challenges with regards to real estate investments.
Sure. And I'm just going to do one question because it relates to what you were talking about, Michaela. And the question is, how far in time can you justify expenses for E2? But I think it's similar. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's similar to the one you just answered. But I think that, you can, as you are applying for an E2, whatever makes sense to include, you can try to include, right? So if you have a, Mikhail, the example that's used, if you have an invoice and proof of payment for something that is relevant to the business, then the idea is that you would be donating that to the business, and you would be able to use the amount that you paid for that as an investment amount. But in some cases, as Michaela mentioned, you don't have receipts, you don't have, or it's very old and it's probably not worth very much, et cetera. But that can go back for quite some time, but I think it may not make as much sense. Like if you're including a computer that you purchased 4 years ago, then normally we still might include the purchase price of the computer, but how much is it really worth, right? Like because at the end of the day, whatever you include, you could go to a consulate and they could ask about it, right? So if you've included a $4,000 receipt for a MacBook that you bought 5 years ago, an officer might take exception to that when you got there, because he might say that it's worth nothing at this point, that if you tried to sell it, people wouldn't take it. They wouldn't even come to your house to pick it up. So, so that's something you have to consider.
So E-2 visa challenges for real estate investments. This is a common question we often get clients asking about, in particular house flipping, or whether it is sufficient to purchase a piece of property, put it in an LLC, and whether that can be some type of E-2 investment. So generally, a real estate holding company does not qualify. Purchasing a property, putting it in the name of an LLC also does not qualify for the E-2, because the officers just aren't convinced that these are real and operating active enterprises. So you really need to be able to show, and this is actually, this exact language is kind of in the regulations, that it's not an idle speculative investment. So, just investing in a property, even if you're saying I'm going to, buy one house and kind of fix it up and sell it, that's generally not going to be sufficient, for an E-2 visa. What you really want to look at if you're interested in real estate is ideas that are just more, you can more easily prove that it's an active enterprise. So for example, real estate brokerage firms, property management companies, if you're going to be doing home renovation or construction. We additionally, going back to house flipping, although consulates don't like it, if you are doing, some type of large scale commercial development, so something that comes to mind is, a client that had, 20 to 30 properties that they were developing and then selling, and had a business model for how they were doing this. That kind of larger scale can work because it's very clear at that point that it's really an active enterprise. And not just, kind of you investing in one piece of property and not necessarily making an active business out of it. You also want to think about, if you're doing these types of real estate companies, are you going to be able to hire employees, to be able to show that it's not a marginal enterprise. And I think they're just always, like, anytime kind of house flipping comes up, we even had a client doing an attenuated kind of real estate business, and the consular officer said, is this a house flipping business? And they were happy when it was not. So again, real estate development can work, but only really on a large scale. You also want to make sure that for anything that you're doing kind of in the home renovation, construction, real estate space, that you have proper licenses. States are, have all of their own kind of regulatory schemes, and, so that you can always be asked about that as well. And if house flipping is something that you're really interested in, and that just is what you want to do, you want to think about, can you combine different real estate services to maybe get yourself to the place where, when you're putting forth a business plan, maybe you have a home renovation company, but house flipping is kind of part of that. Or maybe you're primarily doing property management, but you also invest in real estate as part of that. So that's one way you can work that in, if that's really something you want to make part of your E-2 company. Great. We can move to
one question that came up about real estate, and I think it's a quick answer, Kelly, is that if I buy a business like a convenience store with property and invest around $180,000, what are my chances of an E-2 visa? And the question went on to ask, are there any specific criteria to buy business with real estate? So it's just that buying a business, but the business actually has, I guess, instead of renting the space, you're actually buying the space.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I think that's good. If that's going to be, if it's an asset sale and it's part of your assets, I think that's fine, as long as you're going to be running the convenience store. So there is an active business attached to that real estate purchase.
Perfect. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Great. All right. And then so the other one we wanted to talk about in terms of risky cases are equity trading companies. So this is another one that comes up a lot, in the context of, people are doing trading, they're trading in their own stock portfolio, and they're wondering if this can become an E2 business. So there's kind of some similar challenges to real estate in the sense that you have to convince the consulate or US Citizenship and Immigration Services that you have an active business and you're not just engaging in personal trading, for yourself or for, just family and friends. So, just placing your stock portfolio in the name of an LLC, that's not going to work. Similarly, if, your primary clientele are, friends or family members, that I think is a more difficult route to go unless you're doing it on a really, really large scale or there's enough activity, that the government is satisfied that this is really an active business. But even then, if someone said, well, I don't ever intend to kind of get outside clients, I just intend to do some trading for friends and family, I would say that really would not be, that would not work for an E2 business. And then as well, similar to the real estate industry, equity trading, this can be a really highly regulated industry. So to the extent that you are doing this, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the proper licenses, that you're meeting all the criteria and the regulations, and that the officer is comfortable with whatever structure you put in place. That you're allowed to do what you said that you could do. And then similar to real estate, the larger the scale on which you're doing it, the better chance that the officer will be convinced that this is really an active business. Great. I think we're going to go back to Michaela for some e-visa adjudication trends.
One thing about the trading businesses, Kelly, a lot of the time we get clients that ask, they want to trade on their own account or they want to trade for their friends and family, and what kind of unique things might come up there.
Yeah, so I think that, as I mentioned, friends and family, it's not going to be viewed, I think, as favorably as if you were starting a business and you actually wanted to, obtain kind of clientele who are not your friends and family. So if, in the initial start point, you are doing this for friends and family, I'd say it's not as strong. It would be better if you had letters from prospective outside clients who aren't related to you in some way that indicated they wanted to use your services. But it is something that could be a starting point if you are able to have a strong business plan and convince them that you're actually going to ramp up your operations and do this on a larger, professional scale.
Okay, great, perfect.
Great.
Yeah, so recently we have been getting a lot of questions from clients about how the Biden administration will there be any impact on E2 visa? Are they planning to make any changes to the E2 visa regulations, and what will happen? And many clients have been asking us if the approval rate will change, if they're more likely to get approval now than they were before. So with regards to the approval rate, it's actually very interesting because even during the Trump administration, we have not really seen that the approval rate would decrease a lot. Even in I think it was 2020, 2019, the approval rate was still around 89%, which is very high. So the approval rate didn't really decrease during Trump administration. And we think that is most likely because the E2 investor visa creates jobs for US employees. And the administration was kind of focusing on other types of visas and kind of changing the regulations for other types of visas, but not really for the E2 investor visa. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the approval rate will change a lot because it never really even changed during the past administration.
Yeah, and just one comment on that is that you can, it's interesting with all of the visas, but E2 and E1 in particular, you can look up the government approval rates over the years, and as Michaela mentioned, that's the government approval rate. That in some cases those are people who have applied on their own, and or had lawyers that applied for them that maybe didn't know exactly, weren't as familiar with E2 visas, and even with that, the approval rate is the government posted approval rate is 89%. So I think that's relatively high. So
yeah, because with other types of visas like H-1B L1s, we definitely saw that the approval rate went down drastically, but with the E-2 visa, it kind of stayed the same. So the other question we are also often getting is whether the E-2 visas now with the Biden administration, whether they will be kind of adjudicated faster. So here, I wouldn't necessarily say they will be adjudicated faster. It's been taking a long time to kind of get the E-2 visa adjudicated in the last year. But that is mostly because of COVID, and many consulates are closed. Many consulates are operating in kind of very limited regime. So I would say unless the kind of like the COVID situation, approves globally, the processing times will kind of like likely be the same. But yeah, I wouldn't say that the processing times will change drastically because of the Biden administration. And now, one interesting thing I wanted to bring up quickly is that one change we have actually seen in kind of like the E-2 investor visa area is that President Biden on January 25th, 2021, revoked the Buyer American, Hire American executive order that was passed in 2017 by President Trump. And the purpose of this executive order was to kind of strengthen the position of US workers in the US. And it kind of made it a little bit more difficult for some visa applicants to come to the US and get their visas approved. Now, the Buyer American, Hire American executive order from 2017 never really impacted E-2 visa that much. I would say that the main area that was impacted by this was when someone was applying for E-2 employee visa, the consulates would kind of ask questions to the E-2 employee. For example, like, why a US worker cannot kind of do this job, why you need to come to the US. But the E-2 employee area was really kind of the only one that was affected by the Buyer American, Hire American. But as I mentioned, it was revoked on January 25th, 2021. So we think that the regulation and the Foreign Affairs Manual that the consular officers use when they are adjudicating E-2 visa petitions should be updated in next couple of weeks or next couple of months. Now, another hot topic nowadays is, whether consulates are currently accepting E-2 visa applications and whether they are even issuing E-2 visas. So I would say this depends on a country where the consulate is located. Some consulates are not accepting E-2 visa applications at all. For example, the US consulate in Istanbul, we emailed them and they got back to us that they are currently not even accepting E-2 visa applications. So that may be kind of the extreme case. Then other consulates are still accepting E-2 visa applications, but they are not scheduling E-2 visa interviews. So they may kind of be receiving the applications, even reviewing them or looking at them. But because of COVID, they are just not conducting E-2 visa interviews at this point. And there are also consulates that are accepting E-2 visa applications and that are also still conducting E-2 visa interviews. And one example of that would be, for example, the US consulate in Switzerland. We have seen that we submitted a couple applications there recently, and it generally takes the consulate a couple of weeks to kind of review the application. I would say around maybe like 6 weeks. And they are still having routine E-2 visa interviews. And we just had a client there today that got the E-2 visa approved. So I would say the timelines just vary, based on where the consulate is located, whether the particular country or city is under lockdown. what is the COVID situation there. But it varies from anywhere from they are just not accepting applications at all to they are just operating almost normally. And one option, if you are currently in the U.S. On some other type of visa, you have an option to change your status to E2 status. So you could potentially just submit change of status petition to USCIS, and in that case, you wouldn't have to go to consulate and wait a couple months for your interview, but you could just change or extend your status in the US to E2 investor status. And another thing to keep in mind is that many countries, kind of people who are present in many countries are still banned entry to the US. So if you have been physically present in the Schengen area countries or in the UK or Ireland, in the past, in 14 days before your entry to the US, you would be denied entry because the presidential proclamation kind of restricting the travel is still in place. But there is one exception to this rule, and that is that you could apply for what is called national interest exception. So E2 investors are eligible for the national interest exception. And in the national interest exception application, you would basically have to explain, why you need to come to the US and how is your entry to the US kind of beneficial for the US economy. And you could either apply for the national interest exception, at the same time you are applying for your new E2 visa, and in that case, the consulate usually adjudicates the E2 visa application and the national interest exception application at the same time. Or if you already have a valid E2 visa, you are currently, somewhere in Europe, in your home country, and you need to come back to the US, you could also apply for the national interest exception and just kind of explain, why you need to come and how it would be beneficial for the US economy if you come, and what would happen, what would be the loss for the US company if you cannot come to the US. And now I will briefly go over some issues and some complex areas that come up with the E2 visas. One area or one question we get often is, if the E2 investor have to hire E2 employees before the E2 investor is issued an E2 visa. So again, it is not required that you hire employees before you get the E2 visa and before you come to the US, but it's definitely helpful for the E2 application. And especially as we discussed, when if the investment amount is very low, that may be something that could really help your E2 application. Another complex area is the source and trail of funds. So as Kelly explained in the beginning, when you are applying for E2 investor visa, you have to show what is the source of the money you are investing. And this requirement is usually not an issue when you are applying at a consulate, because the consulates are generally not that concerned, about this. You still have to show that the money is coming from legitimate source. The money is not coming from criminal activity. But with consulate, you don't necessarily have to submit, hundreds of pages of documents kind of showing where the money is coming from and how it got into your bank account. But with USCIS, that's kind of a different question. USCIS is very focused on the source and trail of funds section. And especially in some cases when the money, for example, when the money is coming from a loan or from a gift, the source and trail of funds can become a little bit more complicated. So
And
with
Michaela,
loan,
just with respect to time, just we have about 7 minutes left, so I just want to save about 5 minutes for questions. So we could, with maybe another 2 minutes, and then we can go over
okay,
questions.
sounds good. Yeah, so especially with the loans, so loans are generally fine for E2 visa, but loan cannot be secured by the assets of the E2 company. And with regards to gifts, you know, you can, the source of the money for E2 investment can come from a gift, but then you would have to kind of show, you know, the donor's source of funds, so how the donor got the money. So now E2 visa for to investors. So it's definitely possible to get, you know, if you and your business partner are both from a treaty country, both of you can apply for E2 investor visa, but both of you have to own 50% of the company. And in this case, the investment amount would definitely have to be higher. So it would not be sufficient if you know, each of you invest $50,000, but generally the investment amount would have to be a little bit higher than that. Then substantive changes to E2 business. So if your ownership changes after you get the E2 visa, that is fine, but you still have to keep at least 50% in the company. And if you change the type of business, you know, if it changes substantially, you would have to notify either consulate or USCIS about the substantial change in the type of business. And just quickly about family business purchases. You can purchase, for example, a company from your family member, but this type of transactions are generally much more scrutinized by the consulates and the USCIS.
Perfect, great. No, thank you very much, Kelly and Michaela. Great, excellent presentations. And let us turn to a few questions. One that was asked earlier on, it had to do with a person is in the U.S. on an E2 visa, and then they want to buy another business. So, are they permitted to do that? So we'll turn it to maybe Kelly. Will do.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, it is possible to buy another business, but you want to make sure that you're kind of clearing that ahead of time, you know, with the consulate if it's going to be a completely different type of business, or you want to structure it so that you know, if you're purchasing the assets of a new business and it's coming underneath your current LLC, then there's really no problem with that. If you're primarily still doing the same thing you were doing with your current E2, and this is just an add-on, then there may be nothing that you need to do in terms of informing the consulate. But if you're buying a new business and you're really switching your operation to do something different, you know, then you would need to inform the consulate or USCIS first to get that approval. And additionally, you know, if you're buying something and it's a new LLC, that's also possible, but you yourself as the investor are only allowed to work for the E2 company that was approved. So, you know, operationally, you would need to figure out, you know, whether you have a contract between the companies or how it is that you, you know, are working for that business, because you can't be a direct employee of two LLCs, you know, or two corporations if one of them hasn't been cleared, you know, by the consulate or USCIS.
Perfect. Great. Excellent. So another question, this one I'm just going to answer because I think it's a factual question. Can the visa extend to wife and kids? It can. Your spouse can get an E2 visa and can get work authorization, and children under 21 can get the E2 visa as well. This question, I'm not, can we, oh, so we've answered this during the presentation. The question was, can we apply for an E2 visa in both countries, USA and Canada? So what I think Kelly and Michaela went through was you apply in either, right? So if you're outside of the country, you're going to apply in Canada, or you could be inside the country and plan to go back to a consulate in Canada. And then one of the things that you know, both Kelly and Michaela went through is what's involved in a USCIS filing. So if you're in the US and you don't want to go back to a consulate for whatever reason, because normally most E2 visas are processed at consulates, that's something you could definitely do. Someone had asked the question about the fee paid for a business plan, whether that can be included. I wrote back that it can, but just so that everyone hears the question and answer. Bill, is the bill 10 years? Okay. Is there a bill on giving E2 visa holders more than 10 years to get a green card. Any update on the bill? So there's no update on the bill, unfortunately. There is a bill that does say that, but I think that it hasn't gained a lot of traction. But the bill I think the two key components have to do with being in the US for 10 years and then hiring 2 employees. So that's something that with immigration reform, I think that it is, much better chance that E-2 visas would be reformed in some positive way as well. Can 2 people from the same family apply as 50-50 partnership? So Michaela answered, I was asked earlier on, but Michaela just answered that in the slide, the last slide, and it doesn't matter if they're family members. They could, family members too could do 50-50. So that answer is yes. In what situation would USCIS be involved in a case? So maybe Kelly, I'll put that one to you.
Sure. So USCIS is involved if you're filing something from within the United States. So if you are, if you're filing and you want to get an actual visa in your passport that allows you to travel, you're going to be filing with a consulate. If you're in the US, for example, if you're here on B status, or some other status and you want to change that status to E2, that's when you would be filing with USCIS.
Perfect. Excellent. Sounds good. And then a few questions that came through the Q&A. Right now I'm on a TD visa. Can I buy a business and change status from TD to E2? So I think it's similar to some of the other, but yes, you can you can buy a business on TD status and apply for a change of status and or go to a consulate to apply for an E2. And as we mentioned earlier, spouse does get work authorization. Is Canada completely closed to the US and residents? So, I mean, I'd say that go to the Canadian website and government website to check what the requirements are. But our understanding, because we do U.S. immigration, but my understanding is that yes, it is closed to everyone who is not Canadian, and then people who are Canadian even have very strict requirements with respect to quarantine, etc. So this kind of for non-residents, can they go to Canada? The answer is probably no, but again, it's check with the Canadian government to assess what the requirements are, because those requirements are always changing as well. If you have an already existing business in the U.S. for 2 years to be exact, will the business operating costs for the 2 years count towards your investment? So let's, Michaela or Kelly, which one wants to? That's an interesting question. Comes up often. So.
Yeah, so I mean, the answer is no. Like if you take in revenue and then you spend that revenue on business expenses, that doesn't count as E2 investment. If you yourself have put money in, let's say you put $50,000 in and then that was spent on operating expenses, then yes, that could be counted. But just kind of revenue coming in and being spent on operating expenses is not investment for E2.
Perfect. And there's a question that I have read it, but I just don't understand it. So unfortunately, I can't give an answer to it. It's I don't know if I'll go to the next one, Kelly. But if you want to, Kelly and Michaela, if you want to take a look at it, and if you understand it, it's the can we do 50% partnership, and then it goes on. But I don't really fully understand the question. Okay, I wanted to ask about me and my husband having an equal share of the company, but only investing 100,000 or more. Sure, yeah, that would be fine. You could, if you both owned 50% of the company and you invested 100,000, depending on the consulate, that should be fine. So certainly in Toronto it would be fine, and London it would be fine, and most places, quite frankly, it would be fine. But there are certain consulates that have very high investment amount requirements. If you're renewing this year and because of COVID, your business wasn't as successful, will the impact for you in the renewal? So maybe Michaela, you can answer that one. That's we've had a few like that where we.
Yeah, so definitely in your renewal application, you would want to explain, why the revenue decreased, and obviously you would explain it was because of COVID, and you would explain briefly how COVID, kind of affected your type of business. But we think that, because of COVID and its impact on kind of global economy, most businesses were impacted, at least to some extent by COVID. So I don't think it will kind of necessarily be an issue if the revenue kind of will increase at some point. Also, if you, for example, kept your employees during COVID, you would definitely want to mention that, to just kind of like re-emphasize that even though you lost some money, you kept the employee. But yeah, I think it should be fine as long as the revenue will increase at some point.
Perfect. Excellent. So Kelly and Michaela, did you understand the question that was there? Because I didn't. So did you? No. No. Okay, that sounds good. So no, I didn't. So perfect. Excellent. Again, excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Kelly. Thank you very much, Michaela. In terms of next steps, as I said, we're going to send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to send you a link that will give you the dates and ability to sign up for future webinars. And we are also going to send you the E-2 visa guide. Thank you very much again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.